Okay. All right. Thank you very much for coming. I'm not going to talk a lot, but I do want to first tell you very briefly about the exhibit. Tim is going to provide a lot more information. It's spread over 2 floors of the museum. On the first floor, there is a case with 10 rifles in it, ranging from the 1740s up through about 1850s or so. And on the 3rd floor in the Arts and Industries room, there's another 5 rifles, well, actually 3 rifles, 2 Fowlers, and a shotgun. So, and a mannequin. So I want to thank a few people who have been very helpful in putting this together. First of all, Nick Blanton, who is here this evening, who dressed our mannequin. Our beeline marcher, Roland Cadle, who is not here, who carved the powder horn and made it Adam Sheets' powder horn, so we are calling our marcher Adam. And also a few other people from the museum who are very helpful in putting it together and organizing things from our building committee, Al Levitan, and from our museum committee, John Cavalunas. And of course, my husband Wayne, who has been incredibly helpful all the way through with doing everything from picking up rifles to installing them to keeping me sane. We also very definitely appreciate the help the Beeline March Committee has given us. And Jerry mentioned this summer's activities, and there is a schedule of events out on the table out there. So please, on your way out, pick up the schedule of events. Brian, one of our speakers who restored 2 of our two William Miller Sheets rifles, and they are absolutely gorgeous now. And most of all, we want to thank Tim Hodges, because without Tim, we would not have had an exhibit, okay? His knowledge of the rifles, his knowledge of who owns the rifles, his persuasiveness in convincing people to lend us rifles is the reason that we have an exhibit. So, Tim, come on up. We have, all right, and a certificate of appreciation for you from Historic Shepherdstown, and a gift card to Nick's Airport Inn, which your wife says is your favorite restaurant.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce Brian first because he is speaking first. Brian LaMaster is a master gunsmith, craftsman, and artist. He handcrafts early rifles and Fowlers, offers restorations, and is an expert in Kentucky rifle styles. He's been an appraiser, consultant, advisor, restorer, creator, and historian. His knowledge and experience and work is highly valued. He's been showcased in multiple books and articles. He's talked to gun enthusiasts, the Kentucky Rifle Association, the Sons of the American Revolution, and other organizations. He is a past president of the Kentucky Rifle Association and the Kentucky Rifle Foundation. And as I said, he recently did some restoration work on the 2 William Miller Sheets rifles that are owned by the museum. Tim Hodges is also a former president of the Kentucky Rifle Association. He's been a member since 1983. He's on the board of the Kentucky Rifle Foundation, the educational arm of the Kentucky Rifle Association, and the Kentucky Rifle Foundation is co-sponsoring our exhibit. They've lent us the case that the rifles are in, and they have provided a lot of help, so we really appreciate that. He has been collecting, researching, buying, and selling Kentucky rifles for 50 years. He's a member of the Preservation of Historic Winchester, a member and contributor to the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley, and a member of the Contemporary Long Rifle Association. Through the years, he's owned and studied hundreds of rifles, which is why he knew exactly where to find the rifles for the exhibit. And he also owns and operates Aspen, I can't talk tonight, Aspen Shade Limited, which sells antique Kentucky rifles. Okay, so, right.
I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Tim and I and a number of people I see in the room all love Kentucky Rifles. My father would have said that we were vaccinated with a rusty tack nail, because if it's a rusty piece of iron and it's old, and in our case, it's a wonderful long arm. So my focus tonight, I was at the museum on Wednesday and fielding just a few questions from people, and I found that some people didn't understand some of the evolution of the rifle and also some of the firearms that were used during the Revolution in comparisons. So I've pulled together a slideshow here just to kind of cover some of the basic guns. There's variants in all these things, but we're just going to cover some of the pros and cons. Basically, in 1775, when they got ready to go on the march, the Sheets brothers were hard at work in their shop trying to repair and finish guns for them. I'm sure that the guns that they were doing were not all scratch built at the time in the shop. They're probably doing repairs, simple things like mainsprings, making sure that things were lubricated, taking care of ramrods, etc. for this march. So their job was very tedious. I know how it is when you're pushing towards a show and you have a lot of people trying to get your work in, and you can just imagine what their shop was like at that time. John Adams is sitting here, he's telling you, this is a quote of his, but the main thing I like about it is he says about the particular kind of musket called a rifle has circular grooves inside. And for a rifle to be consistent, basically internally inside the barrel, it has grooves that are scored into it with a cutter, one groove at a time. What it does, it spins the ball and thereby gives you more accuracy. It gives it consistency. It's a lot like a baseball player. When a baseball player grips a ball, he presses it and he spins it. And if he spins it consistently, he can hit the same mark every time. That's the same thing that's happening with a rifle. And the technology of that, you think, who came up with that idea? But if you go back all the way to the point when they were shooting archery, when you shoot an arrow without fletching, it just tail whips and goes nowhere. If you put straight fletching on it, it'll tail whip even more. But if you put a slight helical to the fletches themselves, what happens is it goes in a straight line almost every time. Same technology went in with a rifle to do the same thing. This is a drawing or a watercolor. I'm not going to try to recite his name. I would not have wanted to have his name if I were buying a house in today's world. Writing that 20 times wouldn't work. But basically, he came from New England. He went to Yorktown, and in 1781, he did this wonderful watercolor. And so the guys on the left, you can see they're carrying muskets, the bayonets on the top side. They're pretty much in formation. The rifleman in the center, pretty nonchalant kind of guy. And if you read much about the riflemen themselves, these were hardened wilderness people that were coming out of the woods. They were used to hunting. They're used to sleeping on the ground with a single blanket, a little parched corn in their hand, drinking out of a spring. And so they were very hardened individuals. And so when they called for militia people to come forward, they had more than they needed. And you can imagine when they're sitting there and all these guys are coming in and they have a bunch of gray-haired guys like me that think they can shoot good, and they may be able to, but can you go on a 600-mile walk? So they're having to weed down to get the very cream of the crop, but these guys, a lot of them had a pretty good attitude. So if you think about Daniel Morgan and read some of their, they got in fights and things, but even the watercolor, he's just kind of like, all by himself there in his stature. The guy on the right is probably an artilleryman. That's the igniter in his hand, but yet you look and you still see he's got a cartridge box and a powder horn on his side. The rifleman has a bag and horn, plus you see this axe in the back. And we'll cover that here in just a little bit further. This is your standard Brown Bess musket. Bayonet, strap is normal for carrying. That's your standard issue musket. The pros and cons to a musket is, the plus side is it's speedy to reload. So what you have over here on the right are paper cartridges. The one on the left isn't folded yet because it doesn't have powder in it. But you have a ball, you have a lead ball, the paper's wrapped around it. Normally newspaper was used as a recycled. It would be rolled, a piece of string tied around, the powder would be put down the top, and then you see this tab that's folded over and comes down over. All that was carried as a package. So when they went on the battlefield, what they would do, they'd flip the tab with their thumb. One of the requirements for a musket man to have, he had to have his teeth. He had to have top and bottom teeth to be able to tear the piece of paper off, prime his weapon, pour the charge down, crumple all the paper, and shove it all to the bottom. They were much quicker to be able to reload with this, and we'll show with a rifle it's a little different strategy to get there. Plus side with a Brown Bess or most muskets, iron ramrod, the locks and the stocks tend to be heavier and much more robust, so thereby breakage is a lot less. If you were using a standard Brown Bess, your parts were much more interchangeable from gun to gun, so as an armorer, you're going to have a much better chance of keeping your guns in repair for your battalion because they're all standardized. Also, bore sizes were standardized at that time. So if they're shipping out bullets, they're shipping out a crate of bullets, you have a much better chance of more of your musket guys being able to use the same ball instead of having a separate size for every single one. The biggest thing that they ran into is the bayonet for charges. That was a beneficial thing that a lot of the rifles did not have in the time. And that turned, as the revolution progressed, they found that they really appreciated the muskets more in this open warfare. But when it came down to the woods warfare that the frontiersmen are used to, that's where the riflemen, that's where they surged, and that's where they really came together. Muskets were normally not aimed. It's more of a volley fire. So if you ever picked up a Brown Bess musket and tried to sight it, you'll find the stock's very straight. And the reason is because they're holding it to their shoulder, they're looking, they're taking aim, and then they close their eyes and pull the trigger. And the reason they're closing their eyes is because this guy over here has got a pan on his lock, and when a gun goes off, a flintlock goes off, it has a small hole or a touch hole or a vent that's in the side of the barrel. If you've ever stood next to anybody close range, when they cut that loose, it will pepper you and burn you. Not horribly, but it lets you know it's there. So the reason that they close their eyes is because this poor guy over here is getting your fire and so on and so on and so on. So they really did not aim them. It was a volley fire. And the goal was to shoot as many bullets out there as they can. And that's where the musket performed well. Cartridges are carried in a cartridge box like this. So you can see you can line them all up. Somebody, obviously some wife or somebody thought, hey, I'm going to send you with a heart. Just to remind you, you need to get your butt back home. We got farm and cows to take care of and probably kids. This is what I call an American Jaeger. Jaegers were basically a very early form of rifle that were coming out of Germany, primarily. They had a rifled barrel. The barrels tend to be very, very short in length. They tend to carry a wooden patch box. Tim actually brought a really great gun that has a wooden box. Those boxes tend to be just like a glorified toolbox. It's a dovetailed wooden slider. You opened it up, you put some stuff in it like a toe worm and maybe some tow, but the barrels tend to be very short. This is what you would consider more of a full-blown Kentucky rifle in its beginning stages. You have a long barrel. The longer barrel gives you a few advantages. That the longer barrel, it gives you the spiral grooves, and for the rifling, they tend to have a wooden ramrod. But when you have a longer barrel, you're spreading your sights out. So the farther you stretch everybody thinks that they need a longer barrel to burn more powder to get more distance. That's not necessarily so. It helps in the day with the poor quality power, but when you stretch the sights out, your level of inaccuracy is less the farther they're spread out. It's just mathematics. So if I'm off a hair on the back, and I do the same here, if I shorten the distance up just like a pistol, you'll have more error in your shooting. Basically, that covers most of that. One of the things that we're used to seeing that on American guns primarily, they start doing this instead of a wooden cavity box that slides off, sometimes gets lost in the woods, they start doing what we call a patch box. The patch box would have grease inside of it and sometimes the patches themselves. They would actually pop the thing, pull the patch, slide it through the grease, and then pop the lid shut. And that's a tradition that carried on for more than 100 years later. So when you look at the guns in the museum, many of the guns in the museum have a patch box. It's an evolution from what we're seeing on this early stage. And the artwork, this is the backside of that rifle. Wonderful gun, very early. But you start seeing this folk art decoration that's happening. This is another gun from a different region, real close to the same time period. This is Peter Reeser. You can see the change in the box itself, but the way its thought train is exactly the same. So they're using this brass box. They're changing the decoration of it, and that's the neat thing about what we do when we collect Kentucky rifles. An experienced collector can look at a gun from a distance, look at the box and architecture, and have a pretty darn good idea of where that gun's coming from. And then once you get a little closer and you start looking at engraving details or carving details, sometimes even if it's not signed, you actually know where the gun's, who built the gun itself. This is the other side of the decoration. Carving changed over time. They went from a Baroque style more to this Rococo form. And that's where, when you start looking at different makers, the ones that excelled in the artwork, and that's why a lot of collectors collect for different reasons. They collect regional. Sometimes they collect pure high-quality artwork. And sometimes they're only particular a maker in general. And also your time span. I mean, you can see a Kentucky rifle that's in the 1770s or one that's running all the way up to 1860s, and it appeals to different people for different reasons. But the artwork is what a lot of people truly appreciate. And it may be the whole gun is not a beautiful piece, but yet he executed one element of that which is exceptional for that region. This shows you a few more boxes, different areas in Pennsylvania. And this one on the bottom right actually shows you the inside of that box. Those mechanical things, they actually have a pop spring or a lift spring on them. Then they'll have a release. Many of the makers have special releases. Sometimes they'll be on the hinge if they're coming out of Winchester. And the Sheets rifles that you'll see like in the museum, that actually the release is on the top back corner. So they use pretty much a hidden release, which is kind of fun. This is me and a bunch of rascals a long time ago, back when we were a lot younger. You know, it's basically the doctor's giving you a breakdown of what these guys looked like when they were going out. Not that I'm saying we're qualified to have done that 600-mile walk. I mean, there's a couple rascals in there might be able to. But as far as shooting goes, those guys shot all the time. And if you read some of the exploits of when they were marching, they would go into towns, and there would be fellows that would hold a board between their knees and have somebody else shoot at it. And once you get proficient with a flintlock rifle, you know that shooting an apple at 25 yards or at 50 yards is very simple. But it's all about here. You have to have good eyes, but you know that you can do it, and you get the confidence of it. And you have to keep in mind that these guys were not just marching. They used those same guns to hunt with. That's how they fed their families or how they protected their families. So to be able to go out here and shoot and have some fun, that's a pretty good day right there. But we're a lot older now and gray, and basically just finishing up, the Kentucky rifle has never died out as far as people making it. Thank God that there's been guys that have carried on the tradition long before I was here. You know, people like Carl Pippert that were making guns and collecting guns back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Even before that, you had Hacker Martin working down south in Virginia. They were building guns the whole time. And in certain regions, especially down south, they built muzzle loaders all the way up until present day. I think that brings us to a conclusion. I want to thank the Kentucky Rifle Foundation. We pulled some pictures off of their stuff. Also, there's a young fellow that helped with the computer. He was helping here earlier on the phone, Guy Sherb, that helped pull this slideshow together for me. So I hope this helped lay a little groundwork for what Tim's going to tell you about the collection, and we're looking forward to hearing what he's got. Thank you.
There we are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Hodges, and I've had a wonderful introduction by Donna. I appreciate that. Brian and I both are members of the Kentucky Rifle Foundation. That is the educational arm of the Kentucky Rifle Association. We were formed about 25 years ago as a 501c3 nonprofit organization with the express mission to promote the Kentucky Rifle through educational programs. We started exhibits like we're doing at the museum several years ago. We had 2 large cases handmade for the rifles, and we've been exhibiting at the Luray Valley Museum, the B&O Railroad, all the way out to Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee. So we've had pretty good success with sharing our knowledge with the public, sometimes many hundred thousands of people. Brian gave us a really good overview of the Kentucky Rifle and other guns, too, because other guns were made here in Berkeley and Jefferson County. I think in the 1768 was as early as Henry and Philip Sheets were here working. In 1774, they had a contract to supply the state of Virginia 24 rifles a month. Well, there were other gunsmiths in the area too that were supplying guns for the Revolution. Anthony Noble of Martinsburg, Thomas Rutherford of Mecklenburg, which is Shepherdstown, Adam Stephen of Martinsburg, David Hunter and Peter Light of Berkeley County. So it was a very production-oriented, getting ready for, the Revolutionary War. We're going to jump from there. Well, actually, we're going to go backwards with this first rifle because it's a pretty amazing state of preservation. This was a gun.
Tim.
What? Oh, sorry about that. Here, I'll do this. I think. There. Okay. All right. So this was a gun that could have been made by Thomas Anderson, and he was the gentleman that built the grist mill in Bunker Hill about 1735. And it was made for William Mitchell, who was his father-in-law between 1738 and 1742. It's always been in the area. That's really, this is the oldest gun, not only in this area, but in the whole state of West Virginia and Virginia. The stock is inscribed, next. Whoops, William Mitchell, PC, and it's kind of hard to see, but it's right across the top here. He ran out of room when he got to Mitchell, and he had to put the two L's on the next line. And then PC stood for, go back up there. Oh, okay. PC stood for Peace Commissioner or Magistrate. And so that's how we know the date of the gun. It's very plain, never had a trigger guard. It has what they call a dog lock. Part of that dog lock mechanism is missing. You can see a hole just down by the hammer. And the dog lock was designed to, when the hammer was cocked, this dog lock would hook into it and keep it from firing. It's also missing a frizzen, but it's very crudely made. It was made around an earlier gun, probably from the 1690s, an English gun. But it was stocked right here in Bunker Hill and made for William Mitchell. So that's one of the real rarities in Virginia, West Virginia, and even New England. So next slide. This is not a Berkeley County or Jefferson County rifle. This was actually made in Rockingham County, Virginia. It is of the pre-Revolutionary War era. As Brian mentioned, this brass patch box, this simple hinged lid patch box, was primarily the first iteration of the brass patch box on Kentucky rifles. I brought a rifle here that is about the same period, maybe a little bit earlier, that has a sliding wooden patch box. And so that was something that, like Brian said, they would easily lose the sliding wooden lid. So both the gunsmith and the rifleman worked together to create the Kentucky rifle over a period of years. It was fully developed by the 1750s, but from then on it improved in functional design. And you can go to the next slide. Large bore, probably about 60 caliber, and you can see the rifling grooves cut in the barrel. Some incised carved decoration on the stock, an early flintlock. It doesn't have a piece of flint in the hammer, but if that was there, that would show you how the flintlock mechanism works. In other words, you would put priming, after you loaded the barrel, you'd put priming powder in, close the frizzen, cock the gun, and when you fired it, the hammer would come down with a piece of flint in it and strike the frizzen, forcing it open, creating a bunch of sparks that lit that priming powder in the pan, and then the gun would go off, hopefully. This is a rifle that we could not get for the exhibit. It's attributed to Philip Sheets. It could have accompanied Hugh Stevenson's company on the march. There's no question about it. It was sold at Morphy's auction from the Bill Myers collection back in September of 2021. You can see there's a little bit more elaboration on the patch box. It's a 4-piece patch box now, a little bit more decoration, good heavy architecture. This has sling swivels on it now. That's just a piece of probably, well, it looks pretty darn old. But anyway, those are sling swivels, and they would use that to carry the gun, much like a musket, but they usually weren't outfitted with sling swivels. Next. All right, so rifles of Berkeley and Jefferson County. There were 3 areas of rifle production here. It was Martinsburg, Shepherdstown, and Charlestown. So the first family we're going to talk about is the Reiser family. There were 3 major members of the Reiser family in Martinsburg. Martin Sr. Was born in 1720. Martin Jr. Was born in 1755, and his son was born later on in Cumberland. But anyway, they were probably, he and his dad and his brother, George Reiser, were in Martinsburg at the time of the Revolution, and they were probably making muskets in one of these factories that I mentioned earlier. This particular rifle, we're not sure whether it's Martin I or Martin Jr., but it was made in Martinsburg. And the 4-petal flower, then there also is a flower engraved on the patch box lid. Next slide. The lock is actually stamped M sheets, which is a really, really cool detail. This is a short rifle. I think the barrel is only like 37 inches long, whereas this rifle down here, the barrel is probably 45 inches long. Another large bore with the rifling grooves you can see, and another flintlock. We need to take pictures of flintlocks with pieces of flint in the hammer, so it makes sense. That's a flintlock. But anyway, this is a wonderful gun in great condition. I think we got another slide. Hard to see, but there's a very low relief carving behind the cheek piece. This is a cheek piece. I've got one of these things here. This is a cheek piece right here. And this is some carving that they did. They didn't have to, but it was part of their training. This curly maple stock with nice curl to it. All right, and so in 1793, this guy,
Go back.
1793, this guy's father, Martin Sr., and his brother, George, moved to Cumberland, Maryland, 1793, and he followed, Martin II followed in 1794. Those three guys, well, actually, Martin's father died in 1796, but Martin and his brother George trained about 20 different gunsmiths. It was just amazing how a lot of them were orphans that, had no parents. So they had a pretty large operation in Cumberland, Maryland. His son George took on an apprentice called James Clark, and his brother Hiram Clark. And we'll see an example of James Clark's work later in this in the presentation. Okay, now the next guy is Daniel Marker. Now this gun, it's had a hard life. It dates to about 1820. It was also made in Martinsburg. Big family. Daniel Marker Sr. Had sons and brothers and nephews. A lot of them worked in down the road here in Sharpsburg. They started in Marker's Delight in Maryland. So Daniel Sr. Was a great craftsman. He wasn't a very good husband. He beat his wife, and he got put in prison for that. And so he came to Martinsburg in about 1820 and left about 1823 and went to Ohio. His wife died, and then he married 2 more women. So he wasn't the best character, but he was a great workman. Even though this is in a very bad condition, most guns don't, in this day and age, have been restored. So the next slide. This carving is just phenomenal. I mean, there's cross-hatching in between all these tendril-type carvings, the C-scrolls, and just, I know it's in bad shape, but you just gotta love it. This is checkering. This is something that wasn't very common. It's not real checkering like we see on shotguns and everything today, but it is a form of decoration that a lot of them did. The side plate here is engraved with Rococo designs. And it has a set trigger. In other words, how this was a real advantage for marksmen. They would, of course, load the gun, put powder in the pan and close the frizzen. They would pull the back trigger, and that would set the front trigger, and then they would cock it to half cock. Maybe I'd do that first, whatever. So you would set the rear trigger. This is a little set screw. You could set the pull on the front trigger. So when everything was ready to fire, then you'd pull this front trigger, and it wasn't like you had to engage the sear on the lock. It would do it automatically, and it was almost immediate. So it was a great innovation that was used on a lot of guns, a little bit later period. Nice old surface. Next slide. All right, Shepherdstown. We're going to talk a little bit about the Sheets family. Philip Sheets, the father, 1737 to 1793, and the record sometimes is Shiz or Shuts. There is two signed rifles that exist. One's in the exhibit. One is signed this way. It's in a collection in England. Maybe it'll come here someday. I doubt it. But anyway, his two sons, Martin Sheets, 1776 to 1808, not very old, and then Jacob Sheets, the son. Martin and Jacob, of course, were brothers, 1785 to 1860. William Miller Sheets, we mentioned earlier, we have two in the exhibit, was the son of Jacob Sheets, grandson of Philip Sheets, and he's 1810 to 1866. Jacob Entler, not necessarily a family member, but Philip Sheets' wife was an Entler, and Jacob probably learned his trade with all these Sheets guys, working all the same time in the same shop here in Shepherdstown. Henry Sheets, that's Philip Sheets' brother. They're the ones that had the contracts making muskets for the war effort. After the war, these two guys really excelled at making Kentucky rifles because muskets weren't, after the war was over, people were more interested in the civilian guns, the Kentucky rifles. So they were very successful in both during the Revolutionary War and after making rifles. Now, Henry Sheets moved to Hampshire County with his sons Frederick, Otho, Zebulon, Michael, and Henry Jr. So that was a new frontier. Anyway, they moved to Frankfort, which is now called Fort Ashby, and they set up business there. Michael came back to Charlestown, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, next slide. This is the Philip Sheets. If you notice that I have two dates on here, we feel like the original gun, this patch box and many other parts on this gun, was made by Philip Sheets in 1780. However, at one point in its life, before the end of the flintlock period, the rifle was broken badly, so badly that it couldn't be repaired. So what they would do would be to take certain parts, the important parts, off the rifle. This is a newer lock. But the triggers, I think the toe plate is original, the side plate is, and they would make a new stock for it. Primarily, the reason is the barrel was the most expensive part on a gun. This gun, in the day, might have cost $15. If it didn't have a rifled barrel, it might well cost less than half that. So this is a restock. That's why the date of 1825. But the most important thing is this patch box, because it's a glorious piece of Rococo art. And you can tell it's been placed on another stock because right here there was the lid was a little bit longer. When they restocked it, they had to shave the patch box to make it fit this more modern butt plate. It lost a lot of its heft. Guns that were made in the 1780s were a lot heavier and bolder than guns that were made in the 1820s and beyond. So next slide. There's his signature. Now, those are marks here are marks that some idiot put on there because he clamped it in the vise too tight. He could have just moved it down a little bit more. But anyway, the P is clear. This was a detail that Martin and Jacob, his sons, used on their rifles too, to separate the first initial from the last name. Always with a Z, never with an S. If you got one with an S, you might not have a Shepherdstown gun. Big bore, big bore. And then very similar side plate. We'll get into comparison of details a little bit later. Open sights. Next slide. Now this is the grand gun here. This is Martin Sheets, about 1795. Again, this one is a masterpiece, an absolute masterpiece. A nesting bird, open work upper and lower plates on the patch box, American Rococo, C-scrolls, cross-hatching, set triggers. Now, these set triggers were added at a later date, which was not uncommon. This is original lock. It's never been converted to percussion. It's always been flintlock. It's a Ketlin lock imported from England. Next slide. This was an exhibit at in Fairmont. The Kentucky Rifle Foundation did an exhibit at Prickett's Fort in Fairmont a few years ago, and so this is why this information is here. And it says it's signed in script, M. Sheets for Martin Sheets, about 1800, flintlock. Gives you some of the dimensions. This one had brass wire inlay in all of these lines right here, and there's some existing. Very, very decorative details. This was just some incise carving, very beautiful floral motif behind the barrel tang. Unfortunately, the gun was handled with not much respect after probably several years of use, several decades of use. And the forestock broke. And instead of, replacing the forestock, they added a rib underneath the barrel and converted this into a half-stock rifle. Half-stock rifles were very common in the 1830s and 40s, 50s, and 60s. All right, next slide. Brian mentioned that a lot of the Sheets guys used the patch box lid release in the top section of the butt plate, as he did here. But also they used a button on the bottom of the toe. This is the toe plate on the very bottom of the gun. This actually works the patch box lid. It makes it flip open with a spring that Brian mentioned. This, if you push that, there's a pin inside that hole that'll prick your finger. And that was just a joke that I've seen on more than one rifle, but that's the Sheets for you. So, yeah. So next slide. Eagle inlay, phenomenal relief carving here. Just absolutely gorgeous. Every square inch that he could carve, he did. And it's worn. It's very worn. It's hard to imagine what this gun would have looked like the day he finished it. We'll never know. Next slide. All right, here's Martin's more common work. 4-petal flower. The risers used 4-petal flower a lot. Some Rococo carved engraving here. Single trigger. It just engaged the sear inside the lock, so you had to kind of pull it a little bit hard. They still knew exactly where it would fire. I mean, they were so proficient at these guns that it's just amazing. Next slide. Just a little bit of carving here, a little bit less exciting than the last Martin sheets that we looked at. I'll talk about the star and some of these more common details that appear on Shepherdstown rifles. Next slide. This is Jacob Sheets, his brother, made about 1810. Now this is after Martin died. Martin died in 1808. So sometimes he's referred to John Jacob Sheets. That was a German thing. Johann was like in front of a lot of their names. It's just what they did. I don't know why, but if you hear John Jacob Sheets, well, that's your Shepherdstown guy. So this is a little bit less exciting patchbox finial. Still, very, flintlock now. This one has double set triggers. Not real common in this period in Shepherdstown. Next slide. The reverse of this, a little bit of engraving on the side plate here. And nice surface, but no carving. This was, you saved 50 cents by not carving it. So, next slide. This is not in the exhibit. This is a Jacob Sheets rifle that was used at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. It's inscribed on the patchbox lid, and I'm abbreviating this, carried by William Ross of Captain Beale's Company, New Orleans, 1815. Here this is Jacob, 4-petal flower, open work patch box. This has a circular inlay with a little bit of engraving on it. So, next slide. So some of the similarities between Martin and Jacob's work, they were brothers. The side plates with horns and a tapered end. Also, for some reason, they use this real heavy lobe on the rear ramrod pipe. Most of them are worn through. This is the Jacob. It's not worn through because it's gotten smashed in a little bit. But that's an identifying characteristic of these Shepherdstown guns. Next slide. These 8-point stars. A lot of Kentucky rifles had 8-point stars on them. But I don't know if you can see it real good, but these have 2 little arches back to back that form these small points of that star. Here again, you've got horns on either side of the rear of the lock bolt screw and a tapered tang right there. Next slide. Okay, Jacob also made fowling pieces. There's one that's been loaned to the exhibit that's upstairs. This is one that is actually owned by the museum. It's the only Jacob Entler rifle that I've ever heard of or ever known of. He worked here in Shepherdstown. He didn't live too long. But the difference is that these are smoothbore, very thin barrels, very, very lightweight barrels. They were designed to shoot small pellets, shot, like a shotgun. Much longer barrel than on a rifle. I think this barrel's 47 inches. Plain, no patch box. There wasn't a need for one because they weren't loaded with patches. They, would just load the powder, then, drop the shot down and have some type of wadding to keep it packed. These are two about the same period. This is flintlock. This was a flintlock. But in about 1830, when this percussion ignition system became real popular, it was much quicker, much surer, but you had to buy caps for them. This was converted to percussion like about 80 or 90% of Kentucky rifles were in the 1830s, anywhere from 1825 on up. So this one has never been changed back to flintlock. This one has been, either using old parts or new parts that have been aged to kind of match the patina on the barrels and on the lock plate. This is a little unusual. You've got a full fore-end cap here on the Jacob Sheets rifle, very nicely signed too, by the way. And this has just got a little band right here, a little bit different. But he used a double acorn escutcheon right here. This is one acorn pointing this way and one acorn pointing that way. That was a very common motif used in the Winchester School. Next slide. Now here's another absolutely great, fabulous thing. Shepherdstown, William Miller Sheets, circa about 1840, is signed on the barrel in script, W.M. Sheets, Shepherdstown, 2 words, VA number 85. He numbered every gun that I've ever seen that he signed. It's just something that he just decided to do. The neat thing about this gun is it's all silver mounted. Now, all of the guns that we've seen previously have had brass trigger guards, brass butt plates, brass ramrod pipes, brass fore-end cap. Everything on this gun is silver. Trigger guard, butt plate, patch box. It's just a phenomenal piece of work. It's hard for you probably to remember, but this finial, patchbox finial, was on the Daniel marker. All these guys in this whole general area, the risers, the markers, the sheets, they all exchanged ideas. I mean, competition wasn't like it is today. I mean, some people left. I mean, Henry, Philip's brother, left to go to Hampshire County because he thought that that was greener fields. He could make more rifles and train all of his sons, and he did. And he started the whole Hampshire County rifle style. So let's go on to the next slide. Nicely engraved, nice engraved eagle here, all silver, everything silver. This plate was added later, and it's inscribed Peter C. Brooks from his grandfather Shepherd. And Donna, if you could give us a little bit of information about this rifle. It's in the collection in the museum.
This rifle here was given by Resin Davis Shepherd to his grandson, Peter Brooks. Resin Davis Shepherd is the person who built McMurrin Hall, and he also built Wild Goose. He lived for quite a while in Massachusetts. His wife was originally from Massachusetts. After his wife died, he moved down to New Orleans, made his fortune as a sugar merchant down there. After his wife died, he sent his daughter, Ellen, to Massachusetts to get a New England education. She married a Brooks, and this was given to his grandson. Eventually, his great-granddaughter married into the Saltonstall family. And I grew up in Massachusetts, and the Saltonstalls were a prominent political family in Massachusetts. Leverett Saltonstall was a senator from Massachusetts when I was a kid. He had previously been the governor. And at some point, and we don't know exactly when, the Saltonstalls learned about the Historic Shepherdstown Museum and sent it down to us. So this was donated to us by the Saltonstall family probably in the 1980s. And so we had it, and we actually, I'm sure at some point we knew that the little presentation plaque was on it, but it wasn't until we took it out of the case to send it to Brian to be fixed that it was like, oh, wow, look at that. So this was a very exciting surprise for us to see the presentation plaque on it. So this is in the case downstairs, so that what's nice is it's a clear case so that you can see both sides of the rifle.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is the other William Miller Sheets that is in the exhibit. Brian did a little bit of work on actually both of these to bring them up to speed. Again, silver mounted, but it's still got a brass trigger guard, butt plate, and a very interesting brass patch box, again with a nesting bird. His uncle, Martin Sheets, was the one that built that rifle earlier. Also, his father, Jacob Sheets, made a very, very nice rifle with this nesting bird as well. That's not in the exhibit. It's not my collection anymore either. That's too bad. This is the bottom of the gun, a neat, interesting leer here. Probably had something to do with the owner's name, which is, I think, J.S. Sheets. Okay. So obviously that's another Sheets family. Beautiful wood in the stock. I think is it walnut? It's real figured walnut. Beautiful. It's made on the English sporting rifle style. A little bit different than your average, but it's late, so they could do whatever they wanted. And really, after this period of time, the art on the rifle kind of subsided because there were so many factories making rifles at the time. All right, very interesting toe plate there. Next slide. All right, now we're going to Charlestown. And Michael Sheets, who was the son of Henry Sheets, they moved out to Hampshire County, to Fort Ashby, in the 1790s. Michael trained, but then he left. Maybe he couldn't get along with his brothers, Frederick, Otho, Henry, and another one, Zebulon. So he came back to Charlestown, and he was there fairly early. Another guy, James Clark, I mentioned earlier that he was trained in Cumberland by George Reiser. Okay, so all these guys, they're just all together. Anyway, apparently after his apprenticeship in Cumberland, look, they trained like 20 people. So Cumberland had all of the gunsmiths they could possibly need. So James, Hiram went to, his brother, was trained by George Reiser as well. He came to Hancock, Maryland. Well, James started working at Harper's Ferry Arsenal. He worked there in the early 1820s. Well, of course, that's a stone's throw from Charlestown. And Michael Sheets was well established in Charlestown by this time. This gun is signed Sheets and Clark. And there are not very many Michael Sheets rifles out there. There's a lot more of James Clark's rifles. He left Harper's Ferry, probably was just journeyed. Journeyman is after you've trained to be a gunsmith, you can open your own shop, you can stay in the area, you can leave the area, you can work as a journeyman in other people's shops. And I think that's what he was doing. I think he also worked with Marker, too, in Martinsburg at the time. But at any rate, this is just a phenomenal gun. So next slide. The silver work behind the barrel tang, it's just phenomenal. This was done by Daniel Marker Sr. Toe plate with piercings in it, very difficult to do, open work patch box. Next slide. Flintlock with without a piece of flint in it. And then your gadrooning here in front of the lock, teardrop inlay, single trigger. Here's another important detail that James Clark did on this rifle, as well as rifles that he made after he left the area. It's what they call a broken forestock molding. This is kind of like a groove with lines on either side of it that end in C scrolls. These are very nice silver escutcheons, but this appears on several rifles on later periods in Hampshire County and in a lot of different places too, Maryland as well. There is one Michael Sheets rifle that has this detail. I think that Michael Sheets was the one that originated this detail. I can't prove it. Next slide. This cheek piece inlay, it's just phenomenal work of art. Silver wire surrounding an oval with this is wood, this is a piercing in this cheek piece inlay. It's just phenomenal. More or less tendril carving, simpler carving, but yet very effective. Fills up the whole area. C scrolls here, engraved side plate. Just a fabulous piece of work. A lot of areas are engraved on this, like the butt plate that usually aren't engraved on a lot of rifles. Next slide. All right, now we're going to leave Shepherdstown and Charlestown and Martinsburg, and we're going to follow Frederick Sheets, which is Henry Sheets' son, oldest son. He was a brother of Michael Sheets. Had other brothers too that we mentioned earlier. Henry and his sons moved to Frankfort, now Fort Ashby, in the early 1790s. Henry Sr. is Philip Sheets' brother. Henry died in 1793, and we don't have a signed Henry Sheets rifle. He must have made a whole lot because he lived just almost as long as Philip did, but we've yet to find a signed one by him. Now, we do have one signed one by his son that is kind of boogered up. But anyway, so they got to Frankfort in the 1790s. Their dad died in 1793. So Frederick was the oldest of the sons that would be gunsmiths. And so he went and journeyed. He already knew how to build rifles. But he went to Simon Locke's shop in Winchester in the mid-1790s and worked with him. And he adopted a lot of the details that were being done in Winchester at the time. Simon Locke and John Haymaker, Adam Haymaker, the Fishers. Okay, so this carving design is based on what they were doing at the time in Winchester. It's kind of taken out of the playbook of Simon Locke's carving, Haymaker's carving. Kind of the same with the patch box, these little back-to-back C-scroll on the upper and lower plates. A very common Simon Locke. But he held on to the horns behind the lock bolt plate. So I think that's the end. What's the next slide? Brian, if you'll come up, I guess if there's any questions, we certainly can take them. We can go back. Okay.
You can ask repeat the question when you get it.
Yeah, sure.
I have one.
Okay.
I noticed that some of these rifles have a more of an angle on the buttstock than the other ones. Is Is there a purpose for that? Or is that just a comfort thing?
The question was the drop. One of the, probably the one you saw was the William Miller sheets. They had the JS sheets on the side of it. That one has an extreme amount of drop to it. And a lot of the gunsmiths of the time would build the gun to suit the purchaser. So you may have somebody that comes in, has a very long neck, very short pull, and so they would contour the stock according to that. In that case, that gun had been broken through the lock mortise area, and I repaired it even after that, but it still had a tremendous amount of drop. So it wasn't like it was broken and glued and it had that. But that's not very common. Most of the ones were like the silver-mounted one that you see for the architecture for that school and for that particular maker. Yes, sir.
Were there any double rifles made?
Question was, any double rifles? Yes. Normally you'll see double rifles in a couple configurations. They'll either, in the earlier period, they'll have what's called a winder or what we call a swivel breech. And so at the back end of it, you have two barrels. The earlier pieces have wood that actually goes all the way out the forestock. It's actually one piece of wood with a groove with the barrel channel on both sides and a ramrod slipping down the side of it. And there would be a lever. Many times you'd pull the front of the trigger guard and it would cantilever, it'd be split here, and then it would be a stud here. And what happens is when you squeeze that trigger guard, it pulls a locking lug out of the back of that double barrel mechanism and allows you to swivel it. If you actually go back, let me think of the movie. I think it's not Northwest Passage, but Drums Along the Mohawk. And actually, Gary Cooper's in that. He actually has an original swivel breech that he uses in that movie that you can get an example of. The later ones will do the swivel gun without the wood on the front, and then some guns will actually be two barrels in the percussion area where they'd have a lock on both sides, and then the percussion hammer on the top would catch the top barrel, and the hammer on the other side would have this very much elongated neck that came down and caught the nipple and the drum mechanism for the bottom. Kind of ugly, actually, but. Yes, ma'am.
What kind of wood was generally used, and how long did it typically take to make one of these guns?
You want me to pick that? Or?
Well, good.
Curly maple was used probably 95% of the time. Walnut was the next best. Very few cherry, some curly hickory, ash, weird woods, apple, but 90% were, or more than 90% were curly maple. Very difficult to work with, but very stable and very, very tough. It depended on, the question was what were the woods that the rifles were made of and about how long did it take to make one. In some of these bigger shops, now Sheets here in Shepherdstown, they had several people working for them. Now, it's not a mass production. It was never really a mass production thing. One butt plate wouldn't fit the next gun. I mean, they were individually made. So a lot of it depended on how many people worked. So I would say that, I don't know. He knows more about stuff like that.
Like a gun similar to this in my shop, if I started it. Now, that is not, the number I'll give you is about 200 hours to build a rifle like this. Most of the components, the sheet metal, brass components, and side plates, I would make those from scratch. But the barrel and the lock mechanism, you would order those or buy those in. A lot of times that's called hardware. If you think about it, you go to the hardware store to buy hinges. Well, in the latter 18th century, 19th century, or you had peddlers that came by your shop and would actually sell you parts. And so many of the barrels that we find on some of the Kentucky rifles in the South are actually coming out of Pennsylvania. So you had barrel mills up there, and just to go a little bit farther, the earlier 18th century barrels tended to be hand forged. And so if you watch like the old Williamsburg movie from years ago, you'll see where hand forging, they take a scalp, which is a piece of wrought iron that's normally about 2.5 inches wide. It's very thick, and they turn it, and then they forge weld it as a tube, and they put a mandrel inside, and they keep turning it over a swage block, which keeps making a round tube, and they forge that. So for a gunsmith to do all that, plus once the barrel's forged, you have to ream it out inside, you have to put the rifling inside and forge the flats on it and draw file the flats. Towards the latter part of the 18th century, they started using water-powered mills with big, large grinding wheels where they would chuck this scalp up in a jig and run it linear across the grinding wheel and put the flats on it. But the difference is the earlier 18th century barrels where they're hand forging them, they would tend to make a taper and flare, and they could do that by hand and visually, where the mill on the grinding wheel basically gave you a straight-sided barrel with very little taper or almost no flare to it. So later guns tend to be a little heavier because they're buying these barrels that are like 1 inch on the front and they're 1 inch on the back. They tend to be a little heavier. But the key is the time it takes to build a gun. When you see a gun that was hand forged in the period where they're making all the components, and that's why Tim gets excited when he shows you a gun that says M Sheets on the lock. The reason that's exciting is because what's that saying is that he made the lock. And so when you think about it from the technical standpoint of they're hand forging the tumbler, mainspring, and all the components for that lock in their own shop, that means he has a lot of help or he has a whole lot of time on his hands. Yes, sir.
Where was the building that the factory was at here in Shepherdstown? Still stand?
Well, I think it's, it's where the restaurant is. China Kitchen Restaurant. And I think upstairs, they were famous in later years for this gunstock fence. And I think there's an example of that picket up in the third floor. Yeah. I thought I saw your name on that. Did you donate that? Did you?
Yeah, I had both the stocks. One came from Dick Adams' collection, old collector back home, and it actually has a hole in the side of it where you can see where they attach it. The other stock, and both of these stocks are in the exhibit. One stock, if you look at it, it came from a collector 2 hands down, but the story was it came out of the Sheets gun shop. It actually, when you look at it, you can see where they set the entire barrel. So they had an entire plank, and we always think about if you're going to set the barrel and you have the back of the stock coming up for the wrist, we normally cut the wood out like this. But in this case, on the study piece, they actually inlet the entire barrel all the way to the top, and they had scribe lines where they came back second to cut that. And the reason the stock was rejected, they set the barrel, but when they drilled the ramrod hole, the first time they ran it, it popped out inside the barrel channel, so it went too high. The second time they ran it, it shot out the side, and that's why the gun was rejected. And you even look at the buttstock, you can see where they were taking a hatchet and kind of shaping the back of it. So I'm sure he was really frustrated when that shot out the side. We have those days. We just try not to do them twice.
Yes.
Yes.
In today's dollars, how much did it cost a person to have a Sheets gun built?
It was as much as a year's salary. So it could be $20, $25. I know there was up in Reading area, there was a gunsmith whose account books were discovered. And there was an account where there was a swivel breech rifle, and it exists today, and I think it was $45. So that was a lot of money. And
Well, the Piamengo gun was 52 or 53.
okay, well that
Simpson down there.
had a lot of silver.
That had a lot of embellishment to it.
Yeah. So a gun like the Martin Sheets or the Jacob Sheets, that is kind of the run-of-the-mill production here. Would that be $12, $15? And like I said earlier, if it was a smooth bore, it'd be less than half that. So, okay. Any other questions? Back row, anybody back there? That's my family.
They know it all.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was curious about how they did make the barrel, and you sort of explained that, but I still want to know how they got the spiral carved into the barrel.
Okay. She's asking about the spiral or the grooves that are cut in it. Once the barrel was forged into the round, from a round scalp to a tube, then it was reamed inside so it was polished smooth. And then they have a rifling guide. And the rifling guide is actually, there's different ways to put the spiral. So if you visualize a piece of wood, say if the barrel's, say, 44 inches long, you have to have a mandrel back here that's 44 inches or longer. And on the outside of it, it can either have grooves that are carved into that mandrel, or it'll have pieces of wood laid on the outside of that mandrel, and then it'll go through an indexing guide that has notches in it. So what happens is when you pull the mandrel through with a T-handle that free spins, it'll pull that, and whatever happens, it'll make that turn. And then what they do is they put a steel rod through the barrel that has a cutter on it, and the cutter has two little adjustment screws or a piece of paper they'll slip under, and it'll raise one little tooth up on the cutter. And so if the gun has 7 grooves in it, what that means is they have to index and scratch in that one groove. Then they have to index the entire mandrel another turn, or 1/8 of a turn or 1/7 of a turn, to move over to grab the next groove. And so they're only cutting one groove in at a time. And that's why the barrels are so expensive. So if you think about it, if you take a file and you scratch it across a piece of metal and it burrs it up, when they get finished cutting these grooves in there, that barrel's very sharp on those, what's called a land, which is the high spot. So they have to be lapped or smoothed down inside to take all those cuts off. Otherwise, it cuts the patch. When the patch, I didn't cover this very good, I'm thinking. When they load a rifle, there's a cotton or a linen patch. It's just a piece of cloth material that goes around the lead ball. And so you don't just set the ball down there and push it down. It has a patch that goes on. And what happens is that patch does 2 things. One is it helps clean the bore from the last shot. It also helps make a gas seal around the ball itself. If you think about it, back when kids used to shoot spitballs, if you shoot a spitball and it's dry and you don't get the compression behind it, you don't get the distance. Where if you wet it and you seal it and you roll it tight, now you get some distance out. And everybody's gotten in trouble for it. Nowadays, a kid doesn't even know what a spitball is, you know. So, but that's, you know, for the rifle in itself, if those lands are real sharp, it'll cut that patch. And what will happen is if it cuts a hole in that patch, that means you're getting gas seal, and thereby you're losing your velocity because you're losing your compression.
All right, well, let's give Brian and